In 2002, the US economy faced the 7 of the 12 largest bankruptcies in corporate history, which led to the passing of Sarbanes-Oxley, which was supposed to improve things, but in 2007 and 8, again, the economy faced the failure of some of the largest financial institutions, which led to a recession. Many economists and experts in economy and political science, basically, including people like Alan Greenspan, were shocked. Alan Greenspan, as you might know, is a great supporter of deregulation of financial industry and was also the head of the Federal Reserve in 2006 at the level of greed and corruption exhibited by these financial institutions. The result of these things that happen, these debacles, are chaos in our social, economic, and political lives. Now, there can be many reasons for these economic debacles, but one important reason is the lack of ethical behavior on part of these business decision makers. There can be several reasons for this ethical anemia, but however, one important reason is that business education and business environment as such propagates a dangerous view, that business exists in a realm separate from our social lives, hence regular common sense, morality, and ethicality does not apply to it. Now, before we go deeper into the topic under consideration, I would like to have a couple of slides on what terms and concepts are and how they're related to the way we think. Patricia Verheyen argues that we all perceive, frame, and interact with the world through conceptual schemes that are modified by mental models. So words, terms, biases, interpretations create and provide those mental models. She discusses the case of Ford Pinto, perhaps the most notorious case in the car manufacturing industry. A defect in the fuel tank led to several deaths, and Ford did its infamous cost-benefit analysis. They estimated that if they would spend $11 on the update, this would take care of the problem. But if all 12.5 million cars are recalled, the cost would be around $137 million. Then on the other hand, based on the estimates made by the NHTSA, they estimated that this update would save 180 lives and 180 serious injuries. And that would lead to a benefit or saving of $49.5 million, however, leaving a net loss of $87.5 million. Now the question is, why would they make this decision, the Ford management? Obviously, not all of them were intrinsically evil people. Professor Verheyen argues that they made these calculations because the decision to recall Ford Pinto or not was based on the employee Ford-trained perspective, which precluded ethical considerations from decision-making processes. Hence, a gap was created between personal morality and business decision-making, and the evidence in favor of recall was found inconclusive. Organization cultures that preclude ethicality from the business vocabulary remind me of Newspeak. In the great novel 1984, a totalitarian regime basically wanted to exclude certain words from the vocabulary so that might lead to some kind of thought crime. The logic really was that if we do not have a word for, say, free will or self-expression, then in all probability we will not be able to discuss or relate to the concept of free will and self-expression. The perpetuation of phrases like business is business or business ethics is an oxymoron leads to the creation of economic dogma, which expects unquestioning adherence to these statements as veritable truths and intractable facts. If you look at the overall argument here, which leads to the statement or provides the ideological underpinnings of the statement, business ethics is an oxymoron, you will see the statement is quite simplistic. It's actually intuitive, but it doesn't tell you the whole truth. It basically, if you look at the statement, there are three main ideas that are being expressed here. Number one is that self-interest is the sole motive behind all business activities. Number two is the purpose of any business is just to make money for the shareholders. And three is that business exists in a realm where normal common sense ethics does not apply. Now, I argue that these dogmatic beliefs that have and will create more chaos in our economic lives are dangerous assertions, and they need to be deconstructed and reassessed. The idea of self-interest can be traced back, in economic terms, can be traced back to Adam Smith and his book, The Wealth of Nations, in 1776. Now, this book, to this day, is considered as the foundational work for modern economics. Many scholars and economists have interpreted Adam Smith's work as a paean to unabated pursuit of self-interest, and that claim is supported by this statement, which is perhaps the most quoted statement from that book. As you can see, the butcher and the brewer need our money. We need their products. The market facilitates the exchange. Hence, other than self-interest, no ethical considerations are in play. However, it must be argued that Adam Smith was mistakenly interpreted as an ideologue whose only contribution was the introduction and support of an ethics-free view of economics. Dr. Amartya Sen, who is an economist and a Nobel laureate, he adapts a Shakespearean aphorism thus: while some people are born small, some achieve smallness, the unfortunate Adam Smith has had much smallness thrust upon him. If we really want to understand what Adam Smith really meant by self-interest, we need to go beyond this one statement, which is situated in a book that is 1,400 pages long. We even need to go beyond Wealth of Nations and to other important works, and one of them is The Theory of Moral Sentiments, which preceded and also laid the moral foundation for Wealth of Nations. The Theory of Moral Sentiments begins with this statement, in which you can clearly see that Adam Smith is saying that human beings have an innate desire to see others do well. I can go on and give you several quotations and passages from the Wealth of Nations that are much less cited, but they're at the same time very important to understand what he meant by self-interest. We don't have the time, so the crux really is that Smith had cautioned against self-interest or limitless pursuit of self-interest. He had noted that human beings have two motives to act: self-interest and concern for others, which he called sympathy. And he believed that sympathy would restrict self-interest whenever it is at the expense of other people or whenever fairness and justice required it. In sum, Smith was an economist and a virtue ethicist who provided ethics a dominant place in the free market economy. And he would have never agreed to the thesis that allows or justifies the pursuit of unfettered self-interest or personal gain under the guise of self-interest. The second link in the chain is the argument that allows us to determine the difference between purpose and motive of business. Now, purpose, or telos, as the Greeks used to call it, allows us to understand why certain institutions were created. Motive, on the other hand, is a mechanism. It is based on psychological needs and other needs that stimulates people to act. Both purpose and motive can actually be used to explain why certain things are done, but they could very well be different from each other. Let's take the example of journalism. Journalists work for money because they want to pay their bills. Journalistic outlets also need to have access to funds so that they can keep on operating. But journalism's purpose, as determined by political science scholars, is basically to act as the fourth estate and perform the function of a watchdog over government and other powerful interests in the state. Hence, the original telos of journalism actually is quite important for any healthy democratic society. But if we argue that no, these journalistic outlets are just there to make money, then essentially we are turning means into ends, and by doing so, we're debasing a very important social institution. Business is a social institution. It was created by society so that the members of society can benefit by achieving all of these human needs, including but not limited to profit. No society creates an institution if it's not fulfilling the overall goal of the society. If you go back in the history of corporations, we will realize that corporations were given charters by state legislatures and federal and U.S. legislature based on separate votes. And their economic activities were limited to certain areas that aligned with the overall purpose of the state. Hence, the state or society is the bigger, more important unit. Adam Smith also acknowledged that an overall laudable goal of free market economy is the improvement of the society. And he believed that self-interest is the mechanism behind those business and market transactions. Furthermore, he knew that unfettered pursuit of self-interest will damage social interest. Hence, he was in favor of establishing moral norms to restrict it. Today, the economic dogma puts a disproportionate emphasis on making profit as the sole purpose of corporations. This might be true partially, but think about this. What if the business was created so that it can produce goods and services more effectively or efficiently? What if the business was created because they can bring together skills and resources from different sources for the benefit of all participants? This bottom line myopia needs to be avoided, as when it gets unquestionably ingrained in our business practices, it leads to the development of a callous attitude in business people, in managers, that justify a socially damaging, but at the same time a single-track pursuit of profit at all costs. The last link in the chain is a descriptive argument. It basically says that business is a separate realm. Our common sense morality does not apply to it. A great proponent of this idea is Albert Carr. Carr argues that business executives, in the pursuit of their interest and the interest of their organizations, are supposed to and expected to lie, cheat, and bluff. He compares business with the game of poker. And he says that a game of poker in which distrust is the norm, in which kindness is a source of weakness, in which cunning is a source of strength, friendship is ignored, and in fact, it is quite all right and acceptable to deceive a friend for personal gain. He also instructs business people that if you do lie, cheat in your business transactions, don't feel bad about yourself. You're doing all right. I love to watch gangster movies. And one very important thing and a very interesting aspect of those movies that I found is that how these gangsters are able to bifurcate their personal life with their social life. I mean, in most cases, they're shown in mafia movies. They're shown as individuals who are loving fathers, loving parents, good neighbors, helping people, giving money to charity, going to church. But at the same time, they're extremely, extremely ruthless when it comes to their business transactions. I'm always reminded of this really famous scene from perhaps the greatest gangster movie ever made, The Godfather, in which Michael Corleone finds out that one of his father's old and trusted associates, Tessio, is setting him up to be assassinated. When Tessio is being taken out by Michael's men to be shot, Tessio looks back at Tom Hagen, who was their lawyer and consigliere, and says, well, tell Michael I always liked him. It was business, not personal. But the question really is, setting somebody up to be assassinated, how personal can you get more than it? I fail to understand that. The point really is that I always wonder how did they achieve this compartmentalization. But when you read Carr, you realize maybe they're using the similar strategy. And they are saying, and they're eschewing all blame, all charges of antisocial criminal behavior by believing that their business is a game in which normal common sense morality does not apply. But does business really ask us to lie all the time? Well, if that was the case, then why would companies lose their goodwill, and why would they have negative impact on their bottom lines when they lied? We have the examples of companies like Volkswagen, Toyota, really good companies, but getting into trouble because of lying and deceit. If lying was okay in business, then the idea or the value of promise, explicit and implicit, would end in business. If the lying was okay in business, then the idea or value of good faith, which is a presupposition of all business transactions, would be abolished. Isn't, in some industries, even giving incomplete information intolerable, like the pharmaceutical industry? Even advertising, notwithstanding the hyperbole involved, has to provide us with some credible, useful information to be effective. If advertising is all lying, and we all know it's lying, then why it is effective? And finally, if Carr's argument is actually right, then why would people want to be managers? Because it almost seems that if they want to be managers and do well in their business, they will have to sell their soul. So why would they do it? The fact is that whatever we have that we see in the business world does not support these assertions. There is no universal code of immorality that is followed and subscribed by all business people. Business is part of a society, of our society. And many of the common sense ethical principles like truth-telling, trust building, fulfilling promises, contractual obligations do apply to business that apply to all other institutions in our society. The term business ethics is an oxymoron, leads to a cynical, Darwinian, zero-sum game view in which self-interest is the be-all and end-all of all economic activity. It justifies egoism, which states that people only and always will act in their self-interest. It allows corporations to develop a callous attitude that justifies their most deplorable acts behind the exalted benefits of self-interest. Therefore, the need is to confront these ideas and dogmas and reconstruct them a little bit. The issue is not that all businesses are unethical. The issue is that we need to make ethical behavior the dominant norm. We can achieve this, in fact, by creating ecosystems in businesses where business executives can discuss business issues in ethical terms without being denounced as impractical or too idealistic. We can achieve this by making ethics part of common parlance so as to ensure that our business decision makers are able to develop the ability to discern ethical issues, assess them and analyze them in ethical terms, and eventually develop an overall appreciation of an ethical life. Thank you very much.